Hello and welcome. Today's webinar is Understanding Connections Between Mobility, Transportation, and Quality of Life in Refugee Communities in Tucson, Arizona. My name is Lacey Friedley. I'm the Communications Coordinator at Portland State University's Transportation Research and Education Center. TREC leads the National Institute for Transportation and Communities, a university transportation center funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation. NITC consortium members, in addition to PSU, are the University of Utah, University of Oregon, University of Arizona, University of Texas at Arlington, and the Oregon Institute of Technology. NITC's research priority is improving mobility of people and goods to build strong communities. Our presenter today is Orhon Myadar, who conducted this research while at the University of Arizona. She is now an associate professor of geography and environment at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. As a political geographer, Orhon studies the geographical implications of politics at various scales. She is especially interested in questions of power, ideology, mobility, and identity within the context of shifting political landscapes. Her research studies how borders of belonging or exclusion shift as political regimes change, and how these fluid borders shape the everyday struggles of underserved and marginalized individuals and communities. Before diving into the presentation, I'd like to let you know about another upcoming NITC webinar. On March 14th, Ladd Keith and Christina Currens of the University of Arizona will share research on assessing cool corridor heat resilience strategies for human-scale transportation. Today's presentation will be about 40 minutes long, then we will have 15 minutes to answer your questions. During the presentation, please submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A. After the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to the video recording and presentation slides. If you are tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. A certificate of completion will be posted on the event page within 24 hours after the webinar ends. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenter for today.
Thank you. Let me try sharing my screen. Can you see it okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, for those of you who are here, and then thank you, Lacey and Becca, for organizing this event. So before I start my, it's not working, I think. Okay. So before I start my presentation, I would like to introduce my fantastic team members. And as you can see, our team is quite interdisciplinary. We came from 3 different colleges, 4 different departments across the University of Arizona campus. Since we started the project, 2 of us have joined different institutions. I'm here at University of Hawaii at Manoa, and Nicole is at Willamette University. And I also would like to acknowledge our funder, the National Institute for the Transportation in Communities, for the generous support without which the project would not have been possible. And I also would like to acknowledge and extend our gratitude to various institutions for different support they lended to us throughout this project, which are listed here. Namely, I would like to really extend our thanks to Dr. Barbara Eisworth from Eshkashita Refugee Network, Brooke Bella and Jonathan Chiabasa of Lutheran Refugee Services, and Glenn Wolfgang from Santran, and Charles Meist from for his statistical support. And then also we are grateful for our fantastic student assistants, including Sarah Clark, Chandler Smith, and Luna Chung for their research support, and Nick Daniels for his art illustrations. In fact, in these presentations, all the graphic illustrations that you see in the background were produced by Nick. We actually produced a little magazine with our key findings and everything, and then Nick produced all the images. And last but not least, I would like to express our most sincere thanks and gratitude to all the people who took their time to take part in our interviews and survey. So here is my little brief outline for my today's talk. I will begin by providing some background information on the global refugee crisis to kind of contextualize the reason why we chose to work specifically with refugee communities in Tucson. I will then describe our research methodology before sharing some of our key findings. And then by the way of conclusion, I will share some of our key recommendations. So the basis for this project stems from various projects that I've been working on for the past several years. Before this particular project, I worked on 3 different smaller projects documenting stories of refugees who come from vastly diverse backgrounds, but are united in their shared experience of displacement from their homelands, and then their efforts to rebuild their lives in Tucson. And we were able to leverage and rely on these existing networks and connections to carry out our project. So to give some idea why I am particularly interested in documenting stories of refugees and why we chose to specifically focus on refugee communities in Tucson, let me briefly give you some background information on the global refugee crisis. So as the crisis in Gaza unfolds, and as the war in Sudan rages on in front of our eyes, we are yet again witnessing and reminded of the unimaginable horror and human tolls of violence, wars, and conflicts around the world produce. And as we gather here today in the comforts of our homes, offices, institutions, wherever you may be participating, millions of people are being robbed of their lives and livelihoods in places they call their homes due to forces beyond their control, really. And by the end of last year, nearly 110 people were forcibly displaced, as you can see. And then around half of them are under the age of 18. And these numbers are the highest recorded and are still growing. And then given what's going on in the Middle East and across different parts of the world, we can only expect the number is likely to keep going up. And if you look at the diagram, the orange on the right-hand side indicates the number of people who are designated as refugees, or about 35 million people. And if you look at the 35+ million people as a whole on the left-hand side, you can see the tiniest like sliver or less than 1% of people get resettled in safe countries such as the United States. And as you can see, vast majority of globally displaced people, including those who are designated as refugees, do not get resettled. And they spend years and extended period of time in protracted conditions of uncertainty and precarity. So the global refugee regime was established following World War II and has operated to meet the needs of displaced persons since then. United Nations High Commission for Refugees, or UNHCR, is the chief agency that has led and coordinated the international efforts to lead and coordinate international action to protect refugees since its inception in 1950. The formal designation of the term refugee was adopted by the 1951 Refugee Convention to define a category of people who were displaced and forced to seek refuge away from their homelands. But the scope of the original convention was limited to those fleeing who were displaced in Europe and fleeing wars and violence at the time. So geographically it was limited to Europe, and also temporarily it was confined to the aftermath of World War II. But 1967 protocol broadened the scope both geographically and temporarily to apply to cover refugees universally around the world. So based on this convention and the protocol, this is the current definition of refugee. Essentially, a refugee is someone who is outside of his home or her country of nationality or habitual residence, and they have well-founded fear of persecution on the account of these 5 protected areas, and then they are not able or unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of the country or cannot return for fear of persecution. So I will be using the term refugees throughout the presentation to refer to those people we interviewed, but also I want to emphasize and the term refugee is homogenizing. It is too reductive to describe people who have so widely different, disparate, diverse experiences and stories. But for the purpose of this presentation and the project, I will be using the term refugees. So United States have had a quite robust refugee resettlement program. Since 1975, United States has resettled over 3 million refugees across 50 states. But as you can see on screen, the refugee admissions cap has not really kept up with the growing number of people who are globally displaced. And then did hit the record lowest number in 2021. And since then, it has been slowly growing. And within the United States, Arizona has been one of the top 10 states to have accepted refugees in their states. And Tucson is one of the 2 main cities where refugees are resettled in Arizona. And this is where we conducted our study. And there are a number of organizations that assist refugees, and they provide all kinds of services, including providing technical skills and vocational training and so on. So given, as you saw earlier, how a very tiny, small percentage of the globally displaced people are resettled in countries such as the United States, in cities like Tucson, it's easy to assume that their journey ends at resettlement. While the resettled refugees are afforded with an opportunity to escape this dangerous, often very unpredictable conditions of displacement, their journey does not necessarily end at resettlement. Most refugees face an array of challenges in their post-resettlement as they attempt to integrate into new communities. And one of the main challenges is this unfounded fear and suspicion of refugees, both in local and national discourses. our previous governor, Doug Ducey, for instance, attempted to block refugee resettlement in the state altogether. And as you recall, also, last administration sought to ban refugee admissions in the country, again, citing national security concerns, and temporarily banned all refugees and suspended travelers from 7 Muslim majority countries that you can see here. On the right-hand side, I just highlighted some of the most recent, most prominent terrorist attacks. And as you will see, none of the attackers or those people who were implicated in these terrorist attacks came on refugee status. And then, of course, none of the country was represented in all these incidents. So I argue that this fear and suspicion of refugees is unfounded, and our project, along with my other project, have attempted to push against this and counter this discourses both at national and local levels. So I say it's funded, but also this very comprehensive study that came out from Cato Institute, which is a fairly conservative organization, studying connection between terrorism and immigration within 48-year span since 1975. And that study showed that over this nearly 50-year time period, the risk an American would be killed in a terrorist attack by someone who came as a refugee is almost non-existent. So any other visa category is 1 in 4.3 million per year. And that includes actually September 11 attacks, which was more majority of the number of people who were killed during the attack. So in contrast, chance of an American being murdered in a terrorist attack caused by a refugee is being 1 in 3.6 billion. So in addition to this being a fear of, in addition to being a target of this kind of unwelcoming or even racialized sentiments, both from politicians and as well as general public, refugees face an array of this intersectional challenges. They often face linguistic and cultural barriers as they integrate into new communities. Also, many come with meager to no possessions, and their employment-related skills are often not easily transferable to employment opportunities here in the United States. So if you think about someone who comes from Iraq, who was a doctor in his home country, that person is not likely to be employed as a physician upon arrival. And in addition, refugees are obligated to repay the US government the cost of travel expenses once they become self-sufficient. And many refugees, including many of those we've interviewed, come with deep scars physically and emotionally, and from wars, violence, and things that they've seen and experienced. And majority of refugees have also spent a number of years, extended periods of time in interim places such as refugee camps before their arrival in the United States. So given these compounding challenges, we wanted to study how transportation-related challenges contribute to their sense of well-being. So for this project, we employed a mixed method. We used broad survey, and we had a focus group discussion, And also we had structured interviews. We administered the survey using Qualtrics software, and it was offered in English, Swahili, and Arabic. And 81 individuals responded to our survey. And majority of the survey participants were relatively young, or 46% were 34 years old or younger. Younger meaning the youngest person who could take the survey was 18, so between 18 and 34. In terms of gender, slightly higher male participants took the survey than female participants. And of course, our survey was very important, but we augmented our survey and then interviews with refugees with interviews with officials from, like, members of staff members from refugee resettlement agencies, as well as transportation authorities. So we began our project in 2020, and as you recall, it was the time when the COVID-19 pandemic led to extensive lockdowns, and then social distancing measures were put in place across the United States. So this situation was unique, and when we conceptualized our project, we will be conducting all our interviews in person. But because of this uniqueness of the circumstances, we needed to be creative and in achieving our goals of conducting interviews, as well as maximizing our survey outreach. So to overcome these pandemic-related challenges, we did rely on, we really sought assistance from local refugee agencies and International Rescue Committee, Lutheran Social Services, and Eshkishita Refugee Network. They were incredibly helpful for us to reach out potential participants, specifically Lutheran Social Services. They did recruit bulk of the participants who participated in our project. So as important as they are, we believe that the survey findings are important. Of course, it did shed a lot of important light on various questions we sought to explore, but survey findings also do not reveal important details regarding individual lived experience with navigating challenges in their post-resettlement lives. So we therefore relied on in-depth interviews to learn more about individual as well as family-based strategies they use to address and overcome mobility-related challenges Tucson refugee communities experience. And as you can see, the quote from Bell Hooks, "The power of story lies in our efforts to collectively listen to one another and then affirm uniqueness of each voice." So for our interviews, we did use semi-structured interviews. We prepared our interview questions during the preparation stage, and we began our interviews asking basic questions regarding their place of residence prior to resettlement, a rough age upon resettlement in Tucson. This helped to contextualize how pre-resettlement experience with transportation may have informed or shaped the refugees' post-resettlement experiences. And then interview questions progress to understand each person's unique experience with getting around in Tucson immediately after resettlement and also in subsequent years. But we did try, even though we had our preset questions, we tried to make it also quite fluid, and we didn't want to be mechanically going through one question to the next question. instead allow the interviewee share as much or as little as they felt comfortable. And then we also try to somewhat move away from interviewer and interviewee dynamic and make it more conversation between people. So we would often offer our participants to ask us questions, and then so we felt that this was a very useful way to get to know them as human beings rather than just research participants. So we conducted our study in Tucson. Tucson is a fairly ideal city to study, I think, mobility-related challenges refugees experience, because it's quite representative of mid-scale towns where most of the refugees are resettled across the nation. And then Tucson's land use and transportation systems are fairly similar to many mid-sized cities where most refugees end up. So Tucson is spread across 238 square miles. And then it is the second largest city in Arizona with a population of 540,000 people. And then, just like most mid-sized U.S. Resettlement cities, and it is low density and also very car dependent. But many refugees in these cities come with no access to a personal vehicle. Tucson is no exception. And with the 2,500 person per square mile, single occupancy vehicle use represent nearly 75% of all commuting trips, while an estimated only 3.5% of Tucson residents use public transportation. So in our finding, majority of our respondents did share that mobility-related challenges impact their well-being. And then most of the people we interviewed live in areas where transportation equity is low. And when we asked, most of the refugees by the time of our interviews did have some access to a personal vehicle. And then if they didn't have it, they aspired to get access to a personal vehicle. But at some point after their arrival, most of the refugees will have had to rely on other forms of transportation other than personal vehicle. But Tucson is not particularly easy or safe to navigate by non-vehicular transportation mode. Arizona had pedestrian fatality rate of 2.9 per 100,000 people in 2019, but I think that has remained consistent, and that makes it fifth worst in the country. So, and also, I don't know how many of you have been to Tucson or Arizona. It does get very hot many days of the year, and then we do have two bimodal monsoon season, making it difficult to really walk around Tucson for their basic needs. And then again, Tucson and then Arizona specifically, Arizona in general, and Tucson specifically, the fatality rate is, pedestrian fatality rate is fairly high. And last year, Tucson recorded 39 pedestrian deaths. That's quite high. And then I was speaking to Tucson staff writer Tim Steller about this, and he thought there might be something to it, and he thought disproportionate number of pedestrian and vehicle crashes may involve refugees because of different compounding factors. And the stellar's insight is actually shared by the 2015 study, which revealed that motorists are less likely to stop for minorities. So I think it's quite instructive. Biking in Tucson. So there is some effort on the city's part to address alternative modes of transportation, including biking. For example, the recent passage of Tucson Complete Street Ordinance aims to engage vulnerable populations in developing design guidelines and prioritizing improvement projects. And then these initiatives to make Tucson more bike-friendly have included road renovation efforts such as green lanes and buffered bike lanes. But again, when we spoke with refugees, not many refugees rely on bike as their primary modes of transportation, but we have spoken with some. For instance, we spoke with an Afghan refugee who came to Tucson now going on almost a year, but at the time of the interview, he had been in Tucson for a few months, and he bought a used bike to get around. And then that's what he used for most of his commuting. But he did say that it was difficult to get around, especially when he had to go to somewhat long distance, including his immigration attorney's office. And then Tucson is a spread out city. So generally, it was consistent that people preferred not to rely on bike as their primary means of transportation. And then, of course, using public transportation, most people we have spoken with have relied on Suntran public bus system, at least initially arriving in Tucson. And Tucson's refugee resettling agencies provide bus passes and help refugees to get acquainted with service. And typically through a caseworker who is assigned to assist a family or individual. And then again, as I mentioned, for most refugees, relying on the bus system is only temporary, and they do aspire to get their own private vehicles. But for some few we've spoken with, Suntran remains their primary mode of mobility. For example, we spoke with someone, Zarun was his name. He's originally from Pakistan, and he spent 8 years in Nepal before coming to the United States. And he told us how convenient it was to use the bus system in Tucson, and he showed us the Suntran mobile app that he uses to track arrival times of buses, and allowing him to plan his trip efficiently. But also to note that Zarun speaks English really well, and he's young. So for him, public transportation system was very functional. And similarly, we spoke with Bosco. He's a Congolese young man, and he used to own a car, which he bought as a used car, but he found it too expensive to maintain it. So he sold his car. Now he takes the bus everywhere. And like Zarun, he thinks the mobile app is overall fairly effective. But others have shared an array of barriers accessing and navigating the Suntran bus system, including bus fares, language barriers, and then the inadequate service, not very comfortable, and so on. So some of the codes people shared, sometimes people are not patient, and then when there's a family of few small children getting on the bus, off the bus was difficult. And then someone mentioned that they've wasted their time because it takes a long time to get around, and it wasn't worth their time anymore. And then some people mentioned that taking the bus is expensive. If you go once, it's fine, or twice, it's fine. But if you have to rely on the bus for the primary mode of transportation, it does add up. So instead, people just walk, even in long distance. But Tucson actually has made its bus fare free since COVID-19 pandemic, and has been so. So this has helped a lot of people. So despite these very different challenges people experienced, refugees experience the challenges the refugees experience related to their mobility. Our research also revealed that importance of social network and community support systems that were so critical in mitigating different challenges individuals as well as families encountered. And one recurring thing is the importance of social capital, or this ability of an individual to access various resources within a particular social network. So as you can see on the slide, there's some quotes from different people. So as you can see, some people relied on their church or other social networks, such as their soccer group and so on. And then they also extend help amongst each other. Sometimes these connections were across lines of linguistic, religious, or in country of origin. But sometimes it actually transcended those connections. And then people talked about, first they rely on this extended network, but then once they became accustomed to, or used to, or able to move around freely or have their own transportations, they're the ones who began to help others who just arrived in the city and so on. So this was something quite beautiful and inspiring to learn. And then as you can see, the last quote, it was especially during pandemic, this social network was absolutely paramount for people's sense of well-being. And he, according to this man we interviewed from Liberia, he was giving rides to people who he even didn't know. When someone mentioned need a ride, he would go and get them to their places they needed to go. So another thing we learned through our survey was there are gender dimensions to mobility related challenges. And these challenges are experienced differently by men and women. So female survey respondents report that mobility related barriers impact their social, mental, and physical well-being more than male survey takers. Male participants, on the other hand, reported that the challenges to mobility impact their economic well-being more than their male participants. So that was interesting. Also, in a household with two adult partners, it was more common for men to learn to drive, in many cases, remain the sole driver of the family. But also there was a generational dimension in our observation. Younger women tended to be more willing to take on driving early than their mothers. So the survey, again, the survey findings were helpful, but interviews were the ones also that helped us to really understand very intimate, intricate meanings about this type of challenges. So Dr. Barbara Eisworth also reiterated these findings, and she did say that male parent becoming the first or to remain driver is very common phenomenon. So based on the survey findings, it would be easy to assume this gender disparity or even assumed gender oppression. So we interviewed Constance, and she shared again her family story. And based on this interview, we published this article in GeoCompass. Essentially, so Constance is this woman in her 20s, had this incredibly vibrant personality, this bright smiles. And then we spent an hour chatting with her. And she served in the Army, and she is currently a student at the University of Arizona, and she hopes to become a doctor one day. And she shared how much she appreciated sharing her story, and she believed that sharing her story helps people to better understand why refugees come to the United States. And she said this, she also talked about how her father was the one to drive first, and then, but she also shed very important light in ways why her father began to drive ahead of everyone in the family. So she said, of course, he was the one to take on the lead of driving, but he didn't do it in a way that was like, only I have to do it, you guys can't do it, but in a way that I will do it first, so that way I can provide a way for you guys to go next. And he really did a good job of doing that, because through him, I was able to learn how to drive. Through him, his courage, my mom was able to learn how to drive, and my brother, and then I was able to teach my sister. And she also shared, I'm sure he felt responsible first to learn how to drive, even though he's never driven before in his life. I'm sure there were moments he kind of made mistakes. He kind of shook a little bit and nervous at the end of the day. To him, what mattered was that we were able to have that transportation in the house, that if we needed something, we can go and come back and get it without having to call people. So this was a really particular revealing insight in which it pushed the normative understanding of gender roles manifested in the traditional feminist vantage point. In the mainstream feminist thought, it's convenient to assume subjectivity and oppression when there are disparities in gender roles. But the Constance story revealed that her father took upon the risk rather than privilege of driving first to be able to help his family members rather than oppress, to care of his family and to teach them. So Constance is one of many people who we had such pleasure of speaking with and learning from. But our goal was, our project goal was not to explain, summarize, codify knowledge about the way refugees experience mobility and resettlement, but rather to support the call for this more nuanced understanding of this individual, family, this intimate lived experiences. And I think Constance's story is one of those stories that helped us to understand this very disparate dynamics, different experience, individual unique stories among different people. So based on what we learned from our survey and interview participants, we propose a three-legged approach to leverage on the existing infrastructure, but also to nurture and support this more intentional network, social network opportunities. This model was developed by our grad student, Sarah Clark. So this model proposes this integrated networks to continue supporting existing connections between not only among refugees, but also extend that to non-refugee segments within the community, instead of just relegating them to this refugee community, embrace their contribution to the community and as the integral part of the members of the community. And then setting up more informal intentional meetings. Many people we've spoken with, and some of them have struggled and would have really appreciated and welcomed more opportunities that is set, instead of this very organic ways of relying on social network. This could be more intentional networking meeting, peer meeting events, dedicated time and space for those meetings. And then peer-to-peer mutual aid, and then especially connecting newly resettled refugees with this mutual aid network established by previously resettled refugee status people. But these are already in existence. What we are proposing is make it even more formal, more intentional, because some people did indicate that in the beginning they struggled to know, they didn't know the members of the community members from the same country of origin initially, but over time they got to know. But it would be absolutely helpful to have this infrastructure already set up for people to begin to use to begin to feel more integrated easily within the community. Here is a list of some of our key outputs. So interviews with 40 people, 35 refugees from 13 different countries, survey of 18 people. Also, we published in peer-reviewed articles. We made public presentations. Also, we created this little booklet, because journal articles tend to be really confined to academic communities, and we wanted to produce something that's easily accessible to public. So we created this booklet to showcase our key findings. And so, and with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation, and thank you for your time, and aloha.
Great, thank you, Orhon. That was a great presentation. We'll give people a few minutes to submit any questions they might have. If you are welcome, please submit your questions via the Zoom Q&A field. And while we're giving folks time to chime in, I do have one question, just a general question about transit. You mentioned some of the difficulties people ran into using the SunTrans system in Tucson. And I just wondered if you had come up with any, like, maybe low-hanging fruit things that transit providers could do to support refugee populations. Any recommendations for transit providers?
Thank you for your wonderful question, Daisy. So one of the people we interviewed, Glenn Wolfgang from SunTrans, he agreed that mapping is not quite adequate yet, because it doesn't have the whole system that's easily accessible. So what we learned was that those people who are young and those people who can speak English, like Zarun, it wasn't so difficult, but those people who do not speak English well, or maybe not as competent as using mobile app, something so visual, something they can look and then understand, that would be helpful. As far as I understand, that is lacking based on our interviews, both with refugees as well as this person who works at SunTrans. And then Glenn did recommend it would be helpful to have the manual or the instructions in multiple languages. That might be helpful as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, we have an attendee question. Did you see an increase in transit usage with the formation of the peer-to-peer networks, or did people find other ways to get where they need to go?
So the peer-to-peer was actually one of the most remarkable thing about peer-to-peer situation was getting right. And then by far, again, getting around by personal vehicle is the most preferred way to get around, in part because of the Tucson's transportation system and layout. And it's easier just to hop on the car and go get to places. So peer-to-peer connection was mostly about people with vehicles picking out those with do not have vehicles, or people do not have, relying on those who have. So it was, to me, by far the most common way peer-to-peer connections manifested. I wish if I could say.
Okay. That.
But I will actually just add more on in terms of actually Zarun, the one I shared, who knows how to use the mobile app. He did say that he shows this app to people who don't know how to use it. So I think also those people who need to rely on public transportation can rely or do rely on peer-to-peer support in navigating Santran.
That makes sense as well. So just thinking of future research questions, now that this study is concluded, what's one possible direction you might want to see future research explore this topic?
I'm not sure if I would say future because I'm working on it right now. But this is my fourth project working with refugees, documenting stories of refugees. And regardless of the different themes, each project focused, one question that always come up and I focused on was, do you feel home? Where do you feel home? Given many of these individuals fled their home countries, and oftentimes they spend a number of years in interim places such as refugee camps, and now they're trying to rebuild their lives. And I wanted to wrap up these projects to focus on either tentatively titled as home or belong, something to explore how different people negotiate their sense of belonging in different time periods in different places since their original displacement and their eventual resettlement in Tucson. So that would be really fascinating to see. In fact, I can share a couple of stories of people who, specifically this project. So we interviewed so one of those people we featured here did say he didn't feel home in Tucson. He felt lonely. Most of his family members had already left Tucson, despite the fact that we imagine that they are happier, they finally find peace after resettlement. That's not the case for a lot of people. So this young man is struggling, and then hasn't found his sense of home yet. And there's another person who is originally was born in Eritrea, but her family is from Ethiopia. But she has never been to Ethiopia. But she said, given a chance, she would like to go back to her home. Ethiopia is her home. So her sense of home was so different. It wasn't where she was born. It wasn't where she spent many years. Like it was in Tucson, where she is now going to college. So that will be like a fascinating project for me.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Lots to explore there. Well, I think that about concludes, unless anyone has any open questions, which I don't see any more coming in. So thank you, Orhon, for a great presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I will go ahead and conclude the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Lacey.